Hello, folks. This episode is sponsored by Luke's English Podcast Premium. That's my premium subscription service. And Premium Lepster's new premium content is coming. It's currently in the pipeline. I'm working on it. It will be coming soon, okay? So you can expect more episodes in which I teach you the English language and just help you improve your vocab, grammar, and pronunciation in the usual style, okay? So more episodes coming soon. But now let's begin this new episode, which is all about Sean Connery. And here we go. You're listening to Luke's English Podcast. For more information, visit teacherluke.co.uk. Hello, listeners. You're listening to Luke's English Podcast. I think you probably just heard me say that in the jingle, didn't you? Well, there you go. And now you're hearing me say it again. Shall I say it for a third time? No, it's all right, Luke. We got it. Okay, then. Fine. Anyway, my name's Luke. Welcome to my podcast for learners of English. Here's another new episode. One that I didn't really plan to record today and publish today, but one that I'm doing anyway. I should probably take on a slightly more serious tone of voice at this stage, because this episode is all about Sean Connery. And as you probably know, maybe you don't know. If you don't know, then you're about to know. Sean Connery sadly died at the weekend. I say he sadly died. I don't know if he was sad when he died. I don't know. But it's sad for us. Sean Connery, or Sir Sean Connery, as maybe I should call him, because he did receive a knighthood from Her Majesty the Queen. So here is an episode about Sean Connery, as requested by listeners of my podcast on social media. An episode about Sean Connery, or at least an episode in which I ramble on about Sean Connery. Now, just in case you don't know, and I'm sure that there are some people listening who don't know who Sean Connery is, it seems extraordinary to me, and some other people, I'm sure, will be thinking, who doesn't know who Sean Connery is? I'm sure there are many, many people listening to this who don't know who he is. Maybe it's the pronunciation, Sean Connery. I don't know how you'd say that in your countries. But anyway, Sean Connery, just in case you don't know, Sean Connery was an actor from Scotland who played James Bond. That's probably his most famous role, film role, James Bond. He was technically not the first James Bond. There were other actors who played him previously, but Sean Connery is considered to be the first proper James Bond. People say that he's the actor who defined the role, but he played plenty of other roles in films as well. Which ones, you might be asking? Well, let's just see from my memory, without going onto the IMDb or Wikipedia or anything. What else did Sean Connery appear in? Let's see, he was in Indiana Jones 3, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, playing the part of Indiana Jones's dad. What else was he in? Lots of other stuff. The Untouchables, directed by Brian De Palma, starring Kevin Costner. He was in Highlander. He was in Time Bandits, a Terry Gilliam film. The Hunt for Red October. And loads of others. Okay, you know what? I should probably go onto the IMDb. That's the Internet Movie Database, in order to make sure that I'm not missing anything important, because someone will be listening going, but you forgot to mention this specific film, Luke. Okay, let me mention his biggest film roles. From Russia with Love. The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen from 2003. I'm kind of doing the main ones, the big ones, I think. The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, 2003. Finding Forrester in 2000. Entrapment in 1999. The Rock with Nicolas Cage in 1996. Dragonheart, he played the part of the dragon in that one. He did the voice of the dragon. First Knight, he played the part of King Arthur. What else? Rising Sun, in which the Rising Sun took place in Japan, I believe. Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. He turns up at the end as King Richard. Highlander, Highlander 2, The Hunt for Red October, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, The Untouchables, The Name of the Rose, and various James Bond films. Also Time Bandits, Outland, A Bridge Too Far, lots of other things. The Man Who Would Be King, Murder on the Orient Express, Diamonds Are Forever, You Only Live Twice, Thunderball, Goldfinger, From Russia with Love, Dr. No. I may have missed a James Bond film in there. Never Say Never Again, that one as well. Anyway, lots and lots and lots of different film roles. So, Sean Connery, you know who I'm talking about now. Right. So, did you hear the news then? Did you hear the news? This is actually yesterday morning that the news, I think, was sort of made public that he had died. Did you hear the news? Or maybe this is the first time you're hearing about it. I'd be surprised if this is the first time you're hearing this news. Is this a big moment for you or for people where you are in your country? Is this a big story? Do you care about Sean Connery? I don't know how significant this is to you, although I know that some of you were definitely moved by the news and that you want me to talk about it. I'll let you know how I learned about his death yesterday, and I'll give some of my personal thoughts and stuff in a minute. Of course, it's sad because we loved him in films, and he's gone now. And it's also strange whenever anyone dies because we can't quite come to terms with the fact that someone who we knew is no longer in the world. They're just gone now. It's difficult to come to terms with that. So it's a weird feeling. I mean, we didn't know Sean Connery personally. Maybe you did. I don't know. I don't know who you are. I don't know who you are. Don't joke, Luke. It's not appropriate. It's all right. I think it's okay to still be humorous in sad moments like this. It's all right as far as I'm concerned. I'm not making light of the fact that he's gone. I think at times like this, when a public figure dies, I think we want to hear or read tributes to them. We want to revisit some of their finer moments, to appreciate them, maybe to reevaluate their significance in the world. As people write obituaries about them, we take stock of their whole lives and we think of all the things they did, both good and bad. And this may be the case with Sean Connery because to some extent he was quite divisive in some ways. I think largely he was celebrated. Most people loved him, but he did and said a few controversial things too. I'm going to try and talk about those things. I wasn't planning to do this episode because, well, as you know, I've got my work cut out at the moment. I've got lots of work to do. That's what that means. If you say you have your work cut out or you've got your work cut out, it means you've got lots of work to do. So I do have my work cut out at the moment with things like the Whisperlep competition, and I'm still working on that. Thank you for recent comments in response to the last episode in which I asked you for your thoughts. Also, LEP premium content, I'm also working on that, and other upcoming episodes. So I do have my work cut out. I was sort of in two minds about doing this episode, thinking to myself, I should probably spend this time working on that other stuff I have to do. But for some reason, I feel moved to do this episode right now, right here, and publish it as soon as I can. In terms of other stuff I've got coming up, by the way, I have another interview conversation episode with one of my friends who you haven't heard before. That's coming soon. I was planning to upload that maybe today or tomorrow, but it's going to be pushed back a couple of days. I'll probably upload that one in the next couple of days. Here I am again, probably uploading too many episodes too close together, but I hope you listen to them all. But I digress. The point I was making was that when I heard the news of Sean Connery's death, I did feel sad, as I'll describe in a minute, but I didn't immediately think to myself, I must do an episode about this. That's not what I immediately thought. The main reason being that although I used to enjoy watching Sean Connery in films, and I've always had fun imitating his voice, doing the Sean Connery voice, which I like to do from time to time. You've heard me doing it on the podcast. So I've always enjoyed watching him and, having fun imitating his voice. And people sometimes say that my dad looks like him. I don't know if this counts as a personal connection to Sean Connery, but people have said over the years, your dad looks like Sean Connery. My Japanese friend Moto was really struck by this when he met him once. And he said, your dad looks like Sean Connery. I think he might have been a bit intimidated. So, yeah, imagine like a shorter version of Sean Connery. That's kind of what it's like. Anyway, despite all those things, I don't feel that I really know enough to record a full episode about Sean Connery. Or at least I feel I don't know enough about him to do the sort of tribute that you might expect. I mean, one filled with all the key facts about his life, a full retrospective of the man's life and work, that kind of thing. I'm not really able to do that in the time that I have available to me today. All I can do is just talk to you about what he meant to me personally. This is the thing that I have any authority to talk about. I think it's just my own personal thoughts and feelings about Sean Connery. As I said, I've always enjoyed watching him in films. And by the way, the James Bond films are not my favourite Sean Connery films, I have to say. I've always enjoyed having fun with his characteristic voice. Despite those things, I was never a massive Sean Connery fan. I liked his work, but I wasn't one of those people who just sort of like held him up as a great hero of mine. That's not to say that I don't like him. I like him and his work, but you know what I'm saying. I'm not a super duper, super mega fan. Some of you out there listening are probably bigger fans of his than I am, and you might know more details about his life than I do. And please feel free to add things in the comment section if you feel that I've missed something important or significant. You may have read books about him and so on. I haven't read those books or seen all the documentaries about him or watched all the interviews with him, but I have seen a few. But I will talk about him because I think that he was a huge figure in popular culture, and he was British, of course, although actually I think he was Scottish first and foremost. He was a very proud Scot and a vocal supporter of Scottish independence. So let's say that while technically he was British, because Scotland is part of the UK and British is the adjective we use when referring to the UK. So although Sean Connery was technically British, in his heart he considered himself to be Scottish first and foremost. Also, another reason for me to do this episode is that I think that quite a lot of you out there have been expecting me to talk about Sean Connery. I know this mainly from social media and comments on my website over the last 24 hours. I've had messages requesting an episode on Sean, or messages from people saying that when they heard the news that he'd died, they immediately thought of me and expected an episode about him, which is interesting because I suppose for many people I am your portal to British culture, and you've heard me do my Sean Connery voice on this podcast quite a few times. Anyway, I think that when I get a few comments from people, even just a few comments, it's usually just the tip of the iceberg. And those few comments probably reflect the thoughts of many more of my ninja listeners who don't get in touch with me. So just a few comments probably means that there's quite a lot of you out there who were hoping I could talk about him. So I'm mainly doing this episode in response to the desire of my listeners to hear me talking about this. And it's going to go something like this. I'm going to give my personal thoughts about how I learned about his death and what went through my mind. I'll read from a BBC article about Sean Connery just so I can cover some of the main facts about him, and perhaps read some quotes from public figures who've paid tribute to him in the last few days. And finally, I think it could be fun to consider his voice and do some impressions of him and tell a couple of jokes. I don't mean to be disrespectful, quite the opposite. I believe that mimicry is the sincerest form of flattery. That means copying someone is a sincere way of flattering the person. I think that's true in most cases, maybe not in the case of some people. Some people's voices I copy, naming no names. I don't intend to flatter everyone whose voices I copy, but I think in the case of Sean Connery, I like to think of it as a sign of respect that I have for him. So we'll probably have some fun doing impressions of his voice. We might listen to some samples of him speaking too, if I can find something appropriate. So my personal thoughts then. Okay, so how did I hear about it? How did I hear the news? Well, it was only about 24 hours ago. Yesterday morning, I think I was probably making breakfast with my wife and my daughter. And I think what happened was that my wife looked at her mobile phone and she kind of went like this. She did that thing that people do when they read something sort of surprising. She went like that and put her hand over her mouth. And I thought, oh, someone's died. That was my first thought. She's read a bit of breaking news about someone dying. And I thought, oh, God, who is it? And I said to her, oh, God, it's not Paul, is it? Meaning Paul McCartney. I'm a big fan of his. So I was like, I said, someone's died. And she said, yeah. And I said, please tell me it's not Paul McCartney. And she said, don't worry, it's not Paul McCartney. I said, Ringo? It's not Ringo, is it? She's like, no, it's not Ringo. We then played the usual kind of little guessing game that people play in this situation, where I had to try and guess. We didn't do it as let's play a game. Yeah, it wasn't like that. It was more like I just tried to guess who it was. And I said, oh, God, who is it? Is it a musician? I said. And she said, no. I said, British? She said, yes. And I said, okay, actor? She said, yes. And then I said, Sean Connery. That's how long it took me to work it out, because it wasn't a complete surprise. It's not like when David Bowie died in 2016. Bowie had just released a new album and a new single. And for the David Bowie fans, it was like, oh, he's back. This is fantastic. New work. Wonderful. David Bowie's back. He's probably going to be on TV doing interviews. And then a week later, he was dead. That was a super shock. It was really unexpected. In the case of Sean Connery, I knew that he was unwell. I didn't know exactly what was wrong. I think that he was suffering from dementia, and generally, I mean, he was 90, so he was quite old, and I knew that his health was failing a bit. I knew he was in fairly poor health, and also he'd basically retired from acting. So it wasn't a great surprise. I mean, there are certain celebrities who are very old and you haven't heard from them for a while, or maybe you've heard that they've been suffering from ill health. And so there are various celebrities who you sort of almost expect to pass away, even though it's very sad. Anyway, the point I'm making is it wasn't a big surprise, but it was still sad nonetheless. And what happened next was that I think it was my brother James who texted something in WhatsApp. We've got a WhatsApp group between me and James, my mum and dad and my wife. So the five of us have a sort of a family WhatsApp group where mainly we share pictures of my daughter, but also we do, we just chat about other things. James just posted one single image into the WhatsApp group because he'd obviously heard the news. And the image was a picture of Sean Connery dressed as a fireman. So with the fireman's uniform and a yellow helmet and stuff, he was Sean Connery dressed as a fireman. And he posted that without any text, and I knew exactly what he was saying. And it spoke to me very specifically. I knew exactly what he was saying, and it was actually that was the moment that I kind of started to well up a little bit, if at all. That just was such a specific thing, and I knew exactly it was a thing from our childhood, and it summarized everything, really, all the feelings. Even now, as I think about it, it makes me feel a little bit upset. And I took the photo and I posted it on Twitter without any explanation, no text or anything. And I think I probably just confused everybody. Maybe some people got it, but I think for most people who saw it, they probably thought, huh? What's... In fact, one person on Twitter asked me to explain directly, please explain this. So then, of course, naturally, I explained, because that's what I do, isn't it? I confuse people and then I explain. So let me explain it to you now. So the picture that James sent was a screenshot from a film. The film in question is called Time Bandits, and it's a film directed by Terry Gilliam. Terry Gilliam, who used to be a member of Monty Python's Flying Circus, still is, I think, technically. Gilliam was the animator in Monty Python, who went on to become a great film director, directing various excellent films in a really unique style. But Time Bandits is one of his films, and it's an amazing film, and it's a film that we had on video when we were children. And there are various films that we had on video growing up in the 80s that we used to watch over and over again, and they've made a very lasting impression on James and me. Star Wars is one of them. Others include things like Superman, the original first Superman film with Christopher Reeve, Indiana Jones, lots of others, the Ruttles, the Beatles' Yellow Submarine, and various others. But Time Bandits is definitely one of the films that we saw again and again. And Sean Connery is in the film. He's not the main star of the film. He has a kind of a cameo appearance. A cameo is like a short appearance by a well-known actor or a well-known person in a film. Not the main part, but someone who kind of like appears briefly in a film. So Sean Connery has a cameo appearance in the film. And I think probably for James and me, this was the first time that we ever really saw Sean Connery. It was our introduction to Sean Connery. The film Time Bandits is about a boy called Kevin who lives in a boring suburb in England. And his parents basically don't seem to care about him. His parents spend their time watching TV. His parents are completely obsessed with material things like the latest microwave or the latest oven or the latest fridge freezer for the kitchen. They are living in a soulless, materialistic, consumer-driven world, his parents. Meanwhile, Kevin is a kid... It makes me emotional just thinking about it. He's a kid full of imagination, and he's interested in so many things. He's interested in things like medieval history and myths and legends, and he's so bright and imaginative, but his parents are just locked into the TV, watching adverts for microwaves and things, sitting on their sofa and armchairs, which are still covered in plastic because they don't want to unwrap them because they'll damage the upholstery. And Kevin, basically, like in many of Terry Gilliam's films, Kevin sort of gets lost in his own imagination as he sort of escapes from the drudgery or dullness, the boring life that he's living in, the miserable life that he's got. So he just gets completely absorbed in his tales, the stories and toys that he has in his bedroom. And what happens is that Kevin, maybe it's a dream, maybe he's asleep and he's dreaming it, maybe it's just his imagination when he's playing with his toys, or maybe it really happens to him. He's visited by... Oh, it's very hard to explain. He's visited by time-travelling dwarves, and these time-travelling dwarves are basically servants of God who have a map. The map contains black holes, which are portals through time, and they happen to... one of the portals happens to lead into his bedroom, and one night he basically... He travels through time, and he travels with this gang of dwarves who are going around stealing treasure from different periods of history. And he travels through to... I've talked about this film before. He meets Robin Hood. He goes to the time of the Napoleonic Wars, and he meets Napoleon. He travels through all these amazing periods of history. Maybe it's his imagination, based on the stories he's been reading and the toys he's been playing with, or maybe it really happens to him. We don't know. But there's one moment when Kevin ends up traveling to, oh gosh, where is it? Ancient Greece. So I'm revealing my ignorance here. Agamemnon. Okay, hold on a minute. Okay. King Agamemnon. Greek mythology. Agamemnon was a king of Mycenae, the son or grandson of King Atreus. Okay, so basically, Agamemnon is a king from Greek myth and legend. Okay, so in one of the scenes of the film, Kevin travels all the way back to ancient Greece, and he accidentally saves Agamemnon. Agamemnon is fighting against an enemy in order to save his town. The town apparently has been terrorized by this enemy, and Agamemnon is doing battle with him, and he's losing. He's gonna be killed by this enemy. But Kevin falls from the sky and inadvertently saves Agamemnon's life. Agamemnon then takes Kevin back to his town, and because Kevin has saved his life, this little English boy called Kevin has saved Agamemnon's life. Agamemnon wants to sort of take him in. He sees him as a good luck charm, and he wants to accept him as his own son. Now, we are introduced to Agamemnon on the battlefield. He's wearing a helmet, but at the end of the battle, he removes the helmet, and it's Sean Connery. Okay. And okay, what am I getting at? The point is that he takes his helmet off. It's Sean Connery, and this is the thing about Sean Connery. Okay, he had so much on-screen charisma. He just oozed charisma and charm. And Kevin looks up at Agamemnon as this amazing hero that he's been reading about in his stories and stuff. And who better to play the part of Agamemnon than Sean Connery himself in the early 80s when he was, still physically in his prime. Sean Connery was physically a large man, very broad shoulders, a real sort of macho specimen of a man. And he has a twinkle in his eye. And he takes Kevin in under his wing, which is an expression, as you can imagine. And he becomes a father figure for Kevin. He is everything that Kevin has always wanted, an inspiring, charismatic father figure, unlike his loser dad who doesn't pay him any attention in the real world. And so this was, for James and me, this was our first introduction to Agamemnon, to Sean Connery, I mean, okay? I won't spoil the film. Well, I'll try not to. But eventually Kevin, he has to leave. It's sad. It's a sad moment for him because he wants to stay with Sean Connery, but he has to leave. And he knows he's never going to see him again because he's going to travel through time again with these dwarves. He needs to get home as well, even though he doesn't want to. Basically, at the end of the film, he does end up back home in his suburban English home. He wakes up, apparently, from this dream, and it seems the house is on fire. His childhood home is on fire. It turns out it was one of the microwave ovens that malfunctioned. One of these microwave ovens in the kitchen that his parents were so obsessed by had malfunctioned, causing a great house fire. His parents may or may not have survived the house fire. Kevin is all on his own. He's rescued by one of the firemen, who takes him outside, turns round, takes off his helmet, and the fireman in the real world is played by Sean Connery again. And Kevin can hardly believe his eyes, considering what he's just been through, and all, he can't believe his eyes. There he is, and Sean Connery is there again with this charisma and the little twinkle in his eye, and he smiles at Kevin and winks at him. He's just saved his life. But Kevin is unable to say what he really wants to say, which is like, "Oh my God, it's you. Can I come with you?" But of course, the fireman gets into the fire engine with the other firemen, and they drive off. And at the end of the film, Kevin is left on his own. But I didn't realise I'd get so emotional talking about this. I really didn't. There's me at the beginning of this episode saying, I'm not a big fan of Sean Connery, but I did say that I'd give you my own personal account of this rather than telling you all about the story of Sean Connery's life and all the facts and figures. In 1962, who did this and blah, blah, blah. I think this is what I went for. So can you see why this is an emotional thing? Because it's such a great film, such an important moment in the film, and what Sean Connery's character represents to this young boy is I think, the emotional crux of the whole film, really, and the emotional high point of the film. So when James just texted this image of Sean Connery, the moment in the film where he turns round and you see that it's Sean Connery and he winks at Kevin, that's the image that James sent. And, you can see why that was significant. And I just felt moved to share that on Twitter. But of course, nobody understood the significance of it. I don't know, if maybe some of you, if you follow me on Twitter and you saw that image, maybe you knew, maybe you'd seen Time Bandits and you knew what it all meant. But I think that a lot of you probably didn't understand it, which is fine. So anyway, there you go. That's the image I shared on Twitter. And what it means for me is just simply the cinematic power of Sean Connery. It's hard to explain, isn't it? It's hard to explain the way that an actor can put some magic on the screen. It's a weird thing. It's not necessarily specific things they do. It's just that they have charisma. And Sean Connery had charisma in spades. I think you probably know what I'm talking about. That's the Sean Connery that I like. I said before that I wasn't a huge fan of James Bond. I mean, I enjoy the James Bond films. I did an episode about James Bond about 8 years ago, I think. Episode 120 what? 120 something. Oh, you know what? I'm going to find out. He says, scrolling through the archive. 124, episode 124, around the time that Skyfall came out. I did an episode about James Bond. But, I mean, I'm not a huge fan of James Bond. I find, although the films are enjoyable in their way, I find the character to be a bit problematic. I mean, essentially, he is a psychopath, isn't he? He just... How many people does he kill ruthlessly without seeming to have any emotional reaction to doing it? Also, the way he treats women is questionable, especially in the light of, what's going on in the world today, when we should be more respectful to women, as we always should have been. And Sean Connery's James Bond, well, he was a bit forceful with women sexually, let's say. It's all a bit problematic, James Bond. But regardless of all those things, what Sean Connery gave to us was just something very engaging, very captivating and fascinating as a screen presence. And for some reason, this is very powerful and important to us. We also got him in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, which is a film that I really enjoyed and still enjoy to this day. We went to see that film as a family, I think. Maybe my mum didn't come, but James, Dad, me, and maybe one of my school friends went to see it, and I remember really enjoying it. And Sean Connery does a fantastic job of being Indiana Jones's dad, which was a great addition to the franchise. Really good idea in the third film that they would introduce sort of like an origins story for Indiana Jones, but bringing in Sean Connery was an excellent idea, and he really brings a lot of class and charm to the film. So there you go. Anyway, those are my personal thoughts about it. And just to explain the picture on Twitter, which I posted, if you listen to this on the page for the episode on my website, you'll see that picture. If you're listening to this on YouTube, I think that's probably the picture that I've chosen. Okay, let's get back down to earth a little bit, and we'll have a look at the BBC News article. We're going to read through most of this, just so that at least I can do some of the kind of more standard facts that we should probably cover in an episode like this. So I'm reading from a BBC News article entitled "Sean Connery, James Bond actor, dies aged 90." So here we go. Sir Sean Connery has died at the age of 90. His family has said. The Scottish actor was best known for his portrayal of James Bond, being the first to bring the role to the big screen and appearing in 7 of the spy thrillers. I'm not sure he was the first. I think David Niven played James Bond in another film, but basically he was the first. The article continues. Sir Sean died peacefully in his sleep in the Bahamas, having been unwell for some time, his son said. So at least he died in his sleep. That's all we can hope for, isn't it? His acting career spanned 7 decades, and he won an Oscar in 1988 for his role in The Untouchables, which is a great film, really entertaining Brian De Palma film, full of really exciting moments of tension and drama. Sir Sean's other films included The Hunt for Red October, Highlander, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, and The Rock. Jason Connery said that's Sean Connery's son, I think. Jason Connery said his father had many of his family who could be in the Bahamas around him when he died overnight in Nassau. Nassau? Oh, God. All right. How do you pronounce? Okay, here we go.
Nassau.
I think that's the American English pronunciation. Anyway, it's an island in the Bahamas. Let's go back to the article. Much of the Bond film Thunderball had been filmed there, so maybe it was I don't know if that means it was an important location for him. Must have been a very nice place, though. He said, this is Jason, he said, "We're all working at understanding this huge event as it only happened so recently, even though my dad has been unwell for some time. A sad day for all who knew and loved my dad, and a loss for all people around the world who enjoyed the wonderful gift he has as an actor." His publicist, Nancy Seltzer, said there will be a private ceremony followed by a memorial yet to be planned once the virus has ended. He leaves his wife, Micheline, and sons Jason and Stefan. Daniel Craig, the current James Bond, said that Sir Sean was one of the true greats of cinema. Sir Sean Connery will be remembered as Bond and so much more, he said. He defined an era and a style. The wit and charm he portrayed on screen could be measured in megawatts. He helped create the modern blockbuster. He will continue to influence actors and filmmakers alike for years to come. My thoughts are with his family and loved ones. That was Daniel Craig. In reference to Sir Sean's love of golf, Daniel added, "Wherever he is, I hope there is a golf course." Dame Shirley Bassey, who sang the themes to 3 Bond films, including Goldfinger, paid tribute, saying, "I'm incredibly saddened to hear of Sean's passing. My thoughts are with his family. He was a wonderful person, a true gentleman, and he will be forever connected, and we will forever be connected by Bond." What else can I say? Let's see. Connery made the character of James Bond his own. This is the BBC article, again. Blending ruthlessness with sardonic wit. Many critics didn't like it, and some of the reviews were scathing. That means very critical. But the public did not agree. The action scenes, sex, and exotic locations were a winning formula. In truth, his Bond is now a museum piece, the portrayal of women impossibly dated. The action scenes are still thrilling, but the sex too often bordered on the non-consensual, meaning that the sex scenes in the film were a bit close to non-consensual sex. This is basically where James Bond grabbed a woman and kissed her, sometimes using his physical force to do it, which is very problematic, really, isn't it? Some of you will be going, no, it's fine. It's like, is it really? Thankfully, it's been a while since 007 slapped a woman on the backside, or in fact anywhere else, and forced a kiss. But Connery's performance was of its time, which means if it was of its time, it means that it was just sort of normal for that period. It was also enjoyed by millions of both sexes, and it gave the silver screen a 20th century icon. Sean Connery was knighted by the Queen at Holyrood Palace in 2000. In August, he celebrated his 90th birthday. Bond producers Michael G. Wilson and Barbara Broccoli said they were devastated by the news. Lots of James Bond stuff. James Bond, 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 Bond. George Lucas said that Sir Sean left an indelible mark in cinematic history. I will let you read more. I should probably mention something from Nicola Sturgeon, who is the First Minister of Scotland. Scotland's Prime Minister, basically. Scotland, as you probably know, is part of the United Kingdom, although in Scotland they have a certain amount of devolved power, which means they have a certain amount of law-making power. But there's a very strong movement in Scotland for independence from the United Kingdom. I did an episode about it back in, I think, 2014, when Scotland had a referendum on independence, and the result was that I think 55% of the population said, no, we'd like to stay in the UK. But there's still a very strong movement towards Scottish independence, especially now, considering what's been going on in the UK with Brexit and stuff, and the way that Parliament in London seems to be pushing Scotland in a direction that it doesn't really want to go in. So Scottish independence is very much a thing these days. So Sir Sean Connery was a long-time supporter of Scottish independence, saying in interviews in the run-up to the 2014 referendum that he might return from his Bahamas home to live in Scotland if it voted to break away from the rest of the UK. I understand he lived in Monaco for some time, but I expect he had property in Scotland that he visited from time to time. Maybe he went there to play golf. Anyway, the fact is that despite living away from the country, he did support Scottish independence and was a very proud Scot and a sort of international figurehead for Scotland. Scotland's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, said, "I was heartbroken to learn this morning of the passing of Sir Sean Connery. Our nation today mourns one of her best-loved sons." Sean was born into a working-class Edinburgh family and through talent and sheer hard work became an international film icon and one of the world's most accomplished actors. Sean will be remembered Sean will be remembered best as James Bond. Not Sean will be remembered as the best James Bond, because that's a matter of opinion, but he will be remembered best as James Bond, the classic 007, but his roles were many and varied. He was a global legend, but first and foremost a patriotic and proud Scot. His towering presence at the opening of the Scottish Parliament in 1999 showed his love for the country of his birth. Sean was a lifelong advocate of an independent Scotland, and those of us who share that belief owe him a great debt of gratitude. So there's a bit of politics for you there as well, if that's your cup of tea. Let's listen to a clip of him speaking, okay? Because for me, this is a really big thing. Actually, a huge thing. When we talk about sort of film stars and things, for me, a massive aspect of this is that film stars are so unique because of the way that they speak, not just the way that they look and the way that they move on screen and stuff, but the way that they speak, the sound of their voices. And for many of you around the world, you won't know what their voices sound like because they might be dubbed into your language. For example, in France, films are often dubbed. It's less so these days, but certainly when they're shown on television, films are often dubbed into French. And I think the voice actors do a great job. I don't mean to criticise the people who do the dubbing, but simply the act of dubbing itself, I think, means that you do lose something. First of all, you lose the opportunity to learn English. And we know that countries that don't dub their films actually are at a huge advantage. And it might be one of the reasons why, for example, in Scandinavian countries, their English is so strong, because they show a lot of content on television in English without being dubbed, and often without subtitles as well. So as a result, English language television is totally normal. And obviously, as a result, it has a great effect on people's English. Whereas in France, it's often the case that stuff is dubbed. So, first of all, people don't get the opportunity to listen to English on television. But also, you don't know what some of these actors actually sound like, and their voices are so important. And this makes me think of people like Michael Caine and Sean Connery and Christopher Walken, Robert De Niro, Al Pacino, people like this, all people who I like to do impressions of. This is me maybe grumbling here, because I was like, I do impressions of people and you don't know what they sound like. So when I do an impression of Michael Caine, I'm not saying it's the greatest, but it's a pity if you don't know what he sounds like. So if I do a Sean Connery voice on the podcast, it sort of helps quite a lot if you actually know what he sounds like. Let's have a little listen to Sean Connery. This is just a 2.5-minute clip on YouTube. Of course, there's James Bond related stuff here. It's hard to find any content on YouTube of James Bond, of Sean Connery talking that's not about James Bond. But here we go. This is him talking about whether he was worried about being typecast. To be typecast means if you play one character again and again, then basically the film industry decides that that's the only thing you can do, and audiences will only ever associate you with that role. So you think of someone like Mark Hamill, who played Luke Skywalker in, those 3 Star Wars films, and he had real trouble in his career for a while where he was typecast as Luke Skywalker, that audiences couldn't watch him in a film without just seeing Luke Skywalker. Someone like Daniel Radcliffe, I think, has done quite well to avoid being typecast. He's obviously known for being Harry Potter, but he did various other roles and worked very hard at his image, so that he's not just Harry Potter now. He's got his own acting career, and he can do other roles. But so Sean Connery also managed to avoid being typecast as James Bond, although all we're talking about here is James Bond. But he did go on to do many other films and managed to establish himself as an actor in his own right, apart from the role of James Bond. So this is just him talking in an interview on an American chat show, 60 Minutes. 60 Minutes? I think it is. I think that's what it's called. But you can find this on YouTube, and I'll be putting the video on the page for this episode. Let's just listen. It's 2.5 minutes long. I just want you to listen to what he says and just listen to the sound of his voice and enjoy it. I'll probably break this down if I feel it's necessary afterwards. Here we go.
60 Minutes. Rewind.
The Bond thing, I can remember back just from my own personal memory.
This is the interviewer, by the way, whose name is Steve Croft.
I can remember back just from my own personal memory, back when you stopped doing the Bond films initially, in saying that you wanted to do other things, even though everybody wanted you to be James Bond forever. And you wanted to go out and establish yourself and get people thinking about you as Sean Connery. You finally did it. I mean, I don't think that people, when they look at you now, or they think when they hear your name, they don't automatically think of James Bond. They think of Sean Connery.
Yeah, well, there's
Do you
still
feel
a
like
lot
that's
of
happened?
It's like beauty, in the eye of the beholder. I mean, the people see it this way. There's really only so much you can do in terms of trying to change their view of something, and a lot of people still say, "Hello, Mr. Bond," and like as though one has never heard it before. And because they're still making them, it'll always be there. But I did it basically for myself. You know what I mean? To get a change of job, a change of position, change of way of seeing things and doing things. Especially as an actor, I just found it became very limiting.
Another thing that's interesting is going back and reading material. People assume that was more or less a cartoon role. But in fact, you really defined that character.
Yeah.
The Bond in the movie is not exactly the same as the Bond in the book.
No.
Was it you that came up with the nuances, or did you do it with the director?
No, it's. I think that Terence Young had more to do with than anybody. We had the same sense of humor, and so we wrote the jokes and the business end. I mean, some of the stuff obviously was Fleming. I mean, there's no question, but we shared a lot of the humor. Most of the one-liners and stuff I put in the movie.
And the looks and the expressions, the attitude.
Oh, yeah. Well, one wanted very much to get... we both agreed that we should have somebody that could be capable of doing all the things like snapping the necks and firing the guns and smoking himself to death and all the chasing and the sex, all the stuff that goes with it. But to have a kind of counterbalance of humor, so that it never really lost itself completely in that kind of serious world of spies. But it had to believe that the guy could be dangerous, and so we played that.
Okay, that's just a little example of what Sean Connery actually sounds like there. And so just to kind of summarize, why did he do Bond was, I guess, the first question. And he said that he did it for himself. Is that the first question? I'm not sure it's the first question. It's mainly the first point that he makes. Why did he do Bond? He did it for himself, I think, because it was probably a good opportunity for him to, to get, when you're a young actor, you need a big part like that in a big production. So he did it for himself at the beginning. But then it became limiting for him. As you can imagine, just when you just play one character again and again and again, as an actor, you want to be able to do more than that. You want to be able to, have a wider range of performances and stuff like that. You want to be able to do more. So the character became limiting. The next question was basically about whether he defined the character that we see on screen. So how much of the character of James Bond was created by Sean Connery himself. And Connery mentioned, that a lot of it was, of course, Ian Fleming, the writer of the original books, but that with who, maybe the director or script writer or producer or someone, he did manage to have some say over the way that Bond was portrayed in the films by him. And he basically said that he thought that Bond should be someone capable of all of the action that you see, capable of being ruthless, capable of snapping necks and shooting people and stuff and all that sort of thing. So a certain level of realism, that he should be a believable spy, but with a counterbalance of humour, so that you don't get completely lost in that rather harsh world, that homicidal world of James Bond completely. Without, you need some humour in there too to balance it out. So he mentioned that he added one-liners. These are like little jokes. I mean, James Bond became known for those one-liners. And they became hallmarks of Hollywood action heroes. You think of Arnold Schwarzenegger's characters, he often had one-liners. But a one-liner would be something like, I think in Dr. No, the first James Bond film, there's a scene where James Bond is on a beach with a girl, and a bad guy is approaching them, and James Bond turns around and uses a harpoon gun, one of those guns that you would use to hunt for fish in the sea. It shoots a sort of arrow with a cable on the end of it, to catch fish. He shoots a harpoon gun at this bad guy, which obviously which stabs him and kills him, and I think it sort of sticks him to a tree. And Sean Connery's James Bond goes, "I think you got the point." Right? Those sorts of things. And that quickly became quite cheesy. What are some of the classic one-liners? Okay, come on. James Bond one-liners. Let's have a little listen to some of these. Oh, my goodness. There's 55 of them. Oh, my word. Some of these will be Roger Moore as well, I think.
Your courage, Miss...
Trench.
Okay.
I admire your courage, Miss...
Trench. Sylvia Trench. I admire your luck, Mr.
Bond. James Bond.
Okay, the 55 greatest Bond one-liners. Okay, so we've just seen, a bad guy driving off the edge of a cliff on a motorbike. One bad guy or two bad guys? Probably James Bond rammed the guy off the edge of the cliff and he's falling to his death. And what's James Bond going to say?
All those feathers and he still can't fly.
All those feathers and he still can't fly. So what must have happened is, this really works well, doesn't it, when you explain it? The motorcyclist was covered in feathers, so probably, I don't know, something had happened and he flew off the edge of the cliff and died. And Roger Moore, all those feathers and he still can't fly. I mean, not very funny. Here's a car that's going off the edge of a cliff and exploding. James Bond, played by Sean Connery, is looking down. I expect that James Bond has just, pushed the car off the cliff or something. And what's he going to say?
How did it happen?
How did it happen, says a local man. And Sean Connery says,
I think they were on their way to a funeral.
I think they were on their way to a funeral. Okay, here's here's Roger Moore as James Bond, and a bad guy is in a car on the edge of a cliff, of course, and Roger Moore is going to kick the car, sending the car and the bad guy over the edge, killing him. And what's he going to say?
Had no head for heights.
He had no head for heights. I think the guy got decapitated as well in the accident. If you don't have a head for heights, it means that you get scared when you're in a high place. I mean, it's the tricky thing with James Bond, because on one hand, you've got like a very ruthless killing, and then, that's a little bit dark, isn't it? So let's lighten the mood with a terrible joke. So ruthless murder and really bad jokes. If that's what you like, James Bond is for you. All right. Shall we listen to some of that interview again?
Be James Bond forever, and you wanted to go out and establish yourself and get people thinking about you as Sean Connery. You finally did it. I mean, I don't think that people, when they look at you now, or they think when they hear your name, they don't automatically think of James Bond. They think of Sean Connery.
Yeah, well, there's
Do you
still
feel
a
like
lot
that's
of
happened?
It's like beauty, in the eye of the beholder. I mean, the people see it this way. There's really only so much you can do.
There's only so much you can do. There's only so much you can do. How do you do a Sean Connery impression? Okay, you've got to start with a bit of a Scottish accent like that. You've got to start with a Scottish accent, not like that, not that kind of, but it's quite a subtle Edinburgh accent, really. It's not that strong. And sometimes it kind of becomes a little American as well. But you've got to lower your voice as down low as it can get. And then you've got to sort of purse your lips. So stick your lips out. No, that's not very good. Out. No. Stick your lips out a little bit. Just push them out slightly. And then every S sound becomes a sh sound. So 007, License to Kill. So everything you say ends up sounding very low, very deep, with a sh sound instead of an esh sound. And there you go, you've got your Sean Connery accent.
In terms of trying to change their view of something. And a lot of people still say, hello, Mr. Bond, and, like as if one has never heard it before.
A lot of people say, hello, Mr. Bond, as if one has never heard it before. He's saying a lot of people say, hello, Mr. Bond, when they see him, as if one has never heard it before. He's saying one, meaning as if I have never heard it before. It's a slightly old-fashioned style of speaking. And there you go. I think we're going to end with a couple of jokes here. Okay, these are jokes based entirely on the fact that Sean Connery, instead of saying s, will say sh, okay? So, are you ready? Here comes joke number 1. What time does Sean Connery arrive at Wimbledon? What time does Sean Connery arrive at Wimbledon? The answer, 10ish. Joke number 2. Why does Sean Connery hate crabs? Why does Sean Connery hate crabs? Because they're shellfish. And what did Sean Connery say when a book fell on his head? What did Sean Connery say when a book fell on his head? He said, I can only blame my shelf. Okay, let's dissect the frog. What time does Sean Connery arrive at Wimbledon? Wimbledon, you know, is a famous tennis tournament in London. Okay, what time does Sean Connery arrive? He arrives at 10ish. So 10ish means about 10 o'clock. If you add ISH at the end of a time, 10ish, 11ish, 11:30ish, it means at about that time. So 10ish means at about 10 o'clock. But also, 10ish sounds like the way that Sean Connery would say 10ish, you see. Oh, would anyone like to have a spot of 10ish? Oh, you mean tennis? Yeah. Okay. What time does Sean Connery arrive at Wimbledon? 10ish. It's a good joke. And someone's going, no, it's not. No, you're wrong. It's a good joke. And that is that. Next one. This is less good. Why does Sean Connery hate crabs? Because they're shellfish. They're shellfish. Are crabs shellfish? So, in terms of let's say in terms of seafood, you got fish. Is it just seafood? You don't have to. Maybe just animals in the sea. Fish and seafood. Fish and sea. Let me try again. What are shellfish? Okay, shellfish. Definition. Just to be sure. Any kind of edible aquatic invertebrate animals having a shell, especially mollusks such as clams and oysters, and crustaceans such as lobsters, crabs, and shrimp. So it's basically animals that live in the sea that we usually eat, but they're not fish. They're ones that have shells, or they have an exoskeleton, like a crustacean, like a lobster or crab. So why does Sean Connery hate crabs? Because he thinks they're shellfish. Selfish. So this is Sean Connery saying selfish. It would sound like shellfish. Yes. It's not that great because it only works in one sense. I mean, the fact that they are shellfish is no reason to hate them, is it? You know, because they're crustaceans, that's no reason to hate them. But if they're selfish, that's a reason to hate them. But crabs aren't really selfish. So, okay, the joke is crap. It's just funny because shellfish sounds like the way that Sean Connery would say selfish, and crabs are shellfish. Okay, and thirdly, what did Sean Connery say when a book fell on his head? He said, I can only blame my shelf, which is better. I can only blame my shelf. So your shelf is the place where you would put your books. You have shelves in your home, and you put your books on the bookshelves, and you have bookends that hold the books on the bookshelves. Shelves made of wood, usually. Yes. So I can only blame my shelf means that it's because the shelf was responsible for the book falling off. But I can only blame myself is a common phrase which means it was my fault and nobody else's. What did he say when a book fell on his head? I can only blame my shelf. Meaning I can only blame myself, but also, I can only blame my shelf because that's where you keep your books, isn't it? Now that is a better joke because the joke works in both ways. I can only blame myself, I can only blame my shelf. And Sean Connery, when he says, I can only blame myself, it would sound like, I can only blame my shelf. Okay, ha ha ha, great. Okay. I don't mean to, what's the word for it, be glib in the face of the sad news, but, like the Irish and probably the Scottish and the English should do this, but they don't do it as much. For certainly, the Celtic tradition is that when someone has died, you celebrate them by having fun and laughing and have a big party, and you have music and dancing and laughter and so on. You have a big blowout. So it's not completely inappropriate to tell a couple of jokes at the end, and they're not at the expense of Sean Connery. They are an expression of fondness and affection for him. Okay, well, there you go. That's the end of this episode. I think that I'll be uploading another one pretty soon. This is just a sort of little bonus episode, an unplanned bonus one. I hope you have enjoyed listening to this. It got a little bit emotional in the middle when I started talking about time bandits. But leave your comments in the comments section. Tell us what you think of Sean Connery, both good and bad, if you like. But just leave your thoughts and responses there. It would be nice to read your take on this. But in memory of Sean Connery, this has been my episode. What a great movie star. And they don't make them like that anymore, do they? No, they don't. Thank you so much for listening. I will speak to you again on the podcast soon, but for now, it's time to say goodbye. Bye, 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 bye. Thanks for listening to Luke's English Podcast. For more information, visit teacherluke.co.uk.